They forced her to wear another woman's wedding gown. Jessie Miller, an orphan with calloused hands and borrowed dreams, stood trembling in Whitmore Hall as the Dowager Duchess commanded her to save a scandal. The real bride had vanished. The Duke waited at the altar, and Jessie, plucked from a London charity house, became the unwilling replacement in a marriage built on lies. No one expected what would happen next. The late November morning draped Whitmore Hall in mist and expectation. Every candelabra gleamed with polish. Every rose petal lay perfectly arranged across the marble floors of the great hall, transformed into a temporary chapel. Stained glass windows filtered pale sunlight into ribbons of crimson and gold that danced across the faces of England's finest aristocracy. Ambassadors from 3 countries occupied the front pews. The scent of hothouse flowers mingled with expensive perfume and the faint smoke of beeswax candles. At the altar, Duke Charlie Whitmore stood with military precision, his navy uniform adorned with the golden sash of his family's honors. At 27, he carried the weight of the Whitmore name with the same rigid posture his father had taught him since childhood. His jaw was set, his hands clasped behind his back. He did not fidget. Dukes did not fidget. But his bride did not appear. Minutes stretched into a quarter hour. Whispers began to ripple through the assembled guests like wind through wheat. Charlie's mother, the Dowager Duchess Margaret, sat in the front row with a face carved from ice, but her gloved fingers gripped her prayer book until the leather creaked. A servant appeared at her shoulder, bent low, whispered urgently into her ear. The color drained from the Dowager Duchess's face, though she did not move otherwise. With measured steps, she rose and crossed to her son, her silk skirts rustling with each deliberate stride. She leaned close to Charlie's ear. Her voice was barely audible, but each word landed like a stone. "The bride has fled, Charles. Eleanor is gone." Charlie's expression did not change, though something flickered behind his eyes. Gone. The word tasted of ash and humiliation. He had never loved Eleanor Harrington, but he had been prepared to honor her, to build something resembling partnership from the architecture of their arranged union. Now she had made him a fool before half of London's elite. Miss Harrington left her wedding gown in her chambers, the Dowager Duchess continued, her lips barely moving, along with a letter declaring she could not endure a loveless marriage. "The scandal will ruin us, Charles. The business contracts with her family, the political alliances, everything depends on this union." Charlie finally allowed himself to look at his mother. Her eyes held something he rarely saw there. Fear. "What do you propose?" he asked quietly. The Dowager Duchess straightened, her mind already racing through solutions with the calculating precision that had kept the Whitmore estate thriving for 40 years. "We find a replacement," she said simply. "Before anyone realizes what has happened." Charlie stared at her. "You cannot be serious." "I am entirely serious. Eleanor and the girl I have in mind share similar height and coloring. No one has seen Eleanor up close except family. The guests have been waiting. They expect a wedding. They will have one. This is madness, Mother. This is survival." The Dowager Duchess's voice hardened into steel. "Do you wish to explain to every person in this hall that your bride found you so intolerable? She fled on your wedding morning? Do you wish to watch our family's reputation crumble while the Harringtons withdraw their support and half our business ventures collapse?" Charlie said nothing. He knew she was right. In their world, reputation was currency more valuable than gold. A broken engagement was scandalous. A bride fleeing on her wedding day was catastrophic. "Who?" he asked. "A girl from the charity house in London, one of the institutions your late uncle supported. She is approximately Eleanor's age and appearance. The servants are retrieving her now." "Does she have a choice in this matter?" The Dowager Duchess met her son's gaze without flinching. "None of us have choices, Charles. We have duties." She turned and glided back to her seat, signaling to the minister with a small nod. The ceremony would proceed. It had to. Charlie remained at the altar, his hands now clenched at his sides. He thought of Eleanor's letter, her desperate claim that she could not marry without love. He understood the sentiment, even if he could not condone her cowardice. But whoever this girl was, this stranger about to be dragged into his life, she would have even less choice than Eleanor had possessed. The thought sat heavy in his chest as he waited, the minutes crawling past like hours, while somewhere in the labyrinth of Whitmore Hall, an unsuspecting young woman's entire existence was about to be rewritten without her permission. In the pews, Lady Beatrice Moore, Charlie's elegant cousin, watched the proceedings with sharp interest. Something was wrong. She could smell scandal the way hounds scented blood. Her fan moved languidly before her face, concealing a smile. Whatever was unfolding, it would be far more interesting than a simple society wedding. The Dowager Duchess sat perfectly still, her expression serene, but inside her mind churned with calculations. The girl would arrive within the hour. The guests would be told that the bride had taken ill with nerves and needed a brief delay. Some wine would be served. People would gossip about feminine delicacy and wedding day jitters. And then Jessie Miller, who had awakened that morning expecting nothing more than laundry duties and perhaps a crust of bread for her midday meal, would walk down the aisle in a gown meant for another woman and speak vows that would bind her to a man she had never met. The stained glass windows continued their silent dance of colored light across the empty space where a bride should have been standing. Outside, the November wind picked up, rattling the ancient casements of Whitmore Hall, as if the very walls knew that something unprecedented was about to unfold within them. And in a cramped charity house across the cold expanse of London, a carriage bearing the Whitmore crest was already pulling up to the door. The London charity house sat wedged between a coal merchant's shop and a boarding house that perpetually smelled of boiled cabbage. Its narrow brick facade gave no hint of the 23 girls who lived within its walls, sleeping 4 to a room, rising before dawn to earn their keep through needle and thread. Jessie Miller knelt in the laundry room, her hands submerged in water so cold it made her knuckles ache. At 19, she had spent more than half her life in this building, ever since the day her father's shop collapsed under the weight of debt, and he followed it into the grave 6 months later. She remembered little of him now except the smell of tobacco, and the way he used to hum while arranging bolts of fabric. The laundry mistress was occupied upstairs, which meant Jessie could work in relative peace. She scrubbed a stain from one of the patron lady's petticoats with practiced efficiency. Her hands were rough from years of lye soap and hot water, the nails perpetually rimmed with evidence of labor, but her fingers moved with a delicacy that betrayed her true nature. She had taught herself embroidery by watching the seamstresses, and late at night when the other girls slept, she read books borrowed from the small library the charity house maintained for its benefactors. No one knew she could read. The ability seemed dangerous somehow, like a secret that could be weaponized against her. So she kept it close, along with her other small rebellions against a life that had been chosen for her by circumstance and misfortune. "Jessie," the directress's voice cut through the morning silence like a blade. "Come here immediately." Jessie's hands froze in the washwater. She had done nothing wrong. At least, she did not think she had. With careful movements, she dried her hands on her apron and hurried up the narrow stairs to the directress's office. Mrs. Blackwell stood at her desk, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly as they gripped a letter bearing an impressive wax seal. Behind her, through the small window, Jessie could see a carriage unlike anything that had ever stopped at their door. Black lacquered wood gleamed in the weak sunlight. 2 magnificent horses stamped and snorted, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. A coachman in fine livery sat motionless on the box. Jessie swallowed hard. Whatever this was, it could not be good. "Miss Miller," Mrs. Blackwell began, and the use of her surname made Jessie's stomach drop. "There is a carriage waiting for you. You are to go with them immediately. Where?" The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "Whitmore Hall. The Dowager Duchess has requested your presence." Mrs. Blackwell's voice carried a note of something between awe and terror. "Apparently, your late father once did business with the Duke's uncle. You are considered under the family's protection." Jessie's mind raced. Her father had been a simple shopkeeper who sold fabric to anyone with coin. She remembered no dukes, no protection, no connection to the world of carriages and crests. Why would she want me? I was not given details. Mrs. Blackwell set the letter down with shaking hands. "You are to go immediately. Do not keep them waiting." "But my things, you own nothing that cannot be replaced. Go now." 20 minutes later, Jessie found herself inside the carriage, her threadbare cloak pulled tight around her shoulders. The interior smelled of leather and some expensive perfume she could not name. The seats were upholstered in velvet the color of wine. She perched on the edge of one, afraid to lean back, afraid to touch anything. Through the window, London unfolded like a story she had only ever observed from the edges. Cobblestone streets gave way to broader avenues. Street vendors shouting their wares became elegant shop windows, displaying goods she could never afford. The cramped chaos of the East End transformed into the ordered grandeur of Mayfair. Jessie pressed her palm against the cold glass, watching the city she had known all her life slip away like smoke. Her reflection stared back at her, thin and pale, with dark hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes too large for her face. She looked like what she was, a charity case, a girl with no family, no prospects, no future beyond the laundry tubs and sewing needles. Why would a duchess want her? The journey took nearly 2 hours. London faded into countryside, the city's smoke giving way to open fields and bare trees. Jessie had never been beyond the city limits. The sheer space of it made her dizzy. When Whitmore Hall finally appeared on the horizon, Jessie's breath caught in her throat. It was not a house. It was a palace. 3 stories of honey-colored stone rose from manicured grounds, with wings spreading in both directions, like the arms of some enormous creature preparing to embrace or devour. Windows glittered in the afternoon light. Chimneys punctuated the roofline like sentries. The carriage rolled up a long drive lined with bare trees. Other carriages stood in neat rows near the main entrance, their horses being tended by stable boys in matching uniforms. Jessie glimpsed ladies in elaborate gowns stepping out of vehicles, gentlemen in fine coats. The flash of jewels at throats and wrists. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. The carriage stopped. A footman opened the door and extended a gloved hand to help her descend. Jessie took it because she did not know what else to do. Her worn boots crunched on the gravel drive. Every eye seemed to turn toward her, though in reality, no one looked at the slight figure in the shabby cloak. She was led through a side entrance, away from the grand front doors where the elegant guests entered. The interior was even more overwhelming than the exterior. Marble floors, oil paintings in gilded frames, carved wood panels that gleamed with polish. Her footsteps echoed in spaces so vast they seemed to swallow sound. A stern-faced housekeeper guided her through a maze of corridors until they reached a heavy oak door. The woman knocked once, then opened it without waiting for a response. "The girl, madam," she announced. Jessie stepped into what appeared to be a study. Shelves of leather-bound books lined the walls. A fire crackled in an enormous hearth. And behind a massive desk sat a woman who radiated authority, like heat from a furnace. The Dowager Duchess Margaret rose slowly, her eyes sweeping over Jessie with clinical precision. She was perhaps 50, dressed in dark burgundy silk, her silver hair arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken hours to achieve. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. Her face was handsome rather than beautiful, with strong bones and eyes that missed nothing. She walked around the desk, circling Jessie like a buyer examining merchandise at market. Jessie stood frozen, her hands clenched in her cloak. "The height is correct," the Dowager Duchess murmured, more to herself than to Jessie. "The coloring is adequate. The face is similar enough. Yes, this will work." Jessie found her voice, though it emerged thin and uncertain. "My lady, I do not understand why I'm here." The Dowager Duchess stopped in front of her, those sharp eyes locked onto Jessie's face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "You are here because my family requires a service that only you can provide, Miss Miller. You are here because Eleanor Harrington, who was to marry my son this morning, has fled. You are here because you are approximately her size and coloring, and because no one outside this family has seen her face clearly." She paused, letting each word land with deliberate weight. "You are here because you will take her place at the altar and marry the Duke of Whitmore within the hour." The room tilted. Jessie's vision darkened at the edges. She gripped the back of a nearby chair to keep from falling. "That is impossible," she whispered. "I cannot. I am no one." "You are exactly who I need you to be," the Dowager Duchess interrupted. And you will do this, Miss Miller, because you understand as well as I do that girls like you do not refuse duchesses." The fire crackled. Somewhere in the vast house, a clock chimed the hour. And Jessie Miller, who had awakened that morning expecting nothing more than cold water and clean linens, understood with perfect clarity that her life had just been stolen from her by people who would face no consequences for the theft. 3 women descended upon Jessie the moment she entered the bridal chambers. Their hands were efficient and impersonal, unbuttoning her simple dress, unlacing her worn corset, stripping away every piece of her former life until she stood in nothing but a thin chemise, shivering despite the fire blazing in the hearth. They did not speak to her. They spoke around her as if she were a dress form rather than a person. The stays need to be tighter. Her waist must match the gown. Her hands. Look at her hands. We will need gloves. Long ones. The hair will work once we style it properly. Jessie caught sight of herself in the full-length mirror and barely recognized the reflection. Her dark hair, usually pulled back in a simple knot, now cascaded over her shoulders as one of the women brushed it with long punishing strokes until it gleamed like polished wood. Another woman fastened a corset around her ribs, pulling the laces so tight that Jessie gasped for air. "I cannot breathe," she managed. "You do not need to breathe, dear. You need to fit the dress." The woman's voice was not unkind, but it was firm. "This is how ladies dress. You will adjust." The wedding gown came next, a creation of cream-colored silk and French lace that must have cost more than Jessie had earned in her entire life. It whispered as it slid over her head, settling onto her shoulders with a weight that felt like chains. The bodice hugged her torso, the skirts pooled around her feet in layers of expensive fabric. Seed pearls had been sewn into intricate patterns across the bodice and sleeves. The train stretched behind her for yards. One of the women fastened a veil to her hair, the fabric so fine it was nearly transparent. Another placed a tiara on her head, a delicate thing of diamonds and silver that caught the light and threw tiny rainbows across the walls. "There," the eldest woman said, stepping back to survey their work. "She will do." Jessie stared at the stranger in the mirror. The girl looking back at her wore a fortune in silk and jewels, her face pale as milk, her eyes too wide and dark. She looked like a ghost. She looked like someone else entirely. The door opened. The Dowager Duchess entered, followed by an older gentleman Jessie had not seen before. "This is Mr. Pemberton, the family solicitor," the Dowager Duchess said without preamble. "He will explain what you must do and say. You will memorize it. You will perform it flawlessly. Do you understand, Miss Miller?" Jessie's throat was too tight to speak. She managed a nod. Mr. Pemberton opened a leather folio and began to recite. "When the minister asks if you take Charles Edmund Whitmore as your lawful husband, you will say, 'I do.' When he asks if you promise to honor and obey, you will say, 'I do.' You will not speak otherwise. You will not look at the guests. You will keep your eyes down, as befits a modest bride. When the Duke lifts your veil to kiss you, you will allow it. After the ceremony, you will be escorted immediately to the private family wing. There will be no reception. Do you understand?" "I understand," Jessie whispered. Her voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. The Dowager Duchess moved closer, her eyes boring into Jessie's with an intensity that made her want to flinch. "Listen to me carefully, girl. My son does not know the full extent of what has transpired. He knows Eleanor fled. He does not yet know that you are not she. You will not correct this misunderstanding until after the vows are spoken and witnessed. The marriage must be legal and binding before the truth emerges. Do you comprehend what I am telling you?" "You want me to lie to him," Jessie said quietly. "At the altar. Before God. I want you to save this family from ruin," the Dowager Duchess corrected. "What you call it is immaterial." 20 minutes later, Jessie stood outside the doors to the great hall. Through the heavy wood she could hear the murmur of voices, the rustle of fabric, the occasional cough. Hundreds of people waited beyond that door, aristocrats, politicians, people who belonged to a world she had only ever glimpsed through windows. The doors opened, music swelled. An organ playing something solemn and grand. Every head turned toward her. Jessie's legs trembled so badly she thought she might collapse. but somehow she moved forward, one foot in front of the other, her hand resting lightly on the arm of a footman who had been appointed to walk her down the aisle since she had no father to perform the duty. The walk felt endless. The veil blurred her vision, turning the faces around her into pale smudges. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, on the rose petals scattered across marble, counting her steps because it was the only way to keep from screaming. At the altar, she could see him. The Duke. Charlie Whitmore. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his navy uniform perfectly tailored. His face was handsome in a severe way, all strong angles and firm jaw. His eyes were grey like winter sky, and when they settled on her, Jessie felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. He looked at her, and something flickered across his face. Confusion, perhaps, or suspicion. His brow furrowed slightly as he studied her, and Jessie's heart hammered so hard she was certain everyone in the hall could hear it. Did he know? Could he tell? The minister began to speak, his voice rolling through the hall with practiced solemnity. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God and these witnesses to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony. Jessie barely heard the words. Her vision narrowed to the man standing beside her, to the way his jaw tightened when the minister mentioned Eleanor's name, to the rigid set of his shoulders. Charles Edmund Whitmore, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? There was a pause, a heartbeat, two. Charlie's eyes remained fixed on Jessie's veiled face, and she could see the questions forming behind his gaze. I do, he said finally. His voice was deep, controlled, but Jessie heard the edge of something else beneath it. Doubt, anger, resignation. And do you, Eleanor Catherine Harrington, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? The name hung in the air like an accusation. Jessie opened her mouth, the lie formed on her tongue bitter and necessary. I do, she whispered. The minister smiled, oblivious. Then by the power vested in me by the Church of England, and in the presence of these witnesses, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, your grace. Charlie reached for the veil, his movements slow and deliberate. The fabric lifted away from Jessie's face like mist burning off in morning sun. For the first time he saw her clearly. His eyes widened, just slightly, just enough that Jessie saw it. He knew. In that instant, he understood that the woman standing before him was not Eleanor Harrington, but the vows had been spoken, the witnesses had heard, the register would be signed. Charlie's expression hardened into something unreadable. Without a word, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that lasted exactly as long as propriety demanded, and not a moment longer. His mouth was warm but not welcoming. The kiss held no tenderness, no promise. It was a formality, nothing more. When he pulled back, his eyes met hers, and Jessie saw anger there, and something else, something that looked almost like pity. The organ swelled again. The guests erupted into polite applause. Bells began to ring from somewhere in the estate, announcing to the countryside that the Duke of Whitmore had married, and Jessie Miller, who had been no one and nothing, became a duchess through deception and desperation, bound to a man who already despised her for a lie she had no choice but to tell. Charlie took her arm, his grip firm but not gentle, and led her back down the aisle. His face remained impassive, the perfect mask of a nobleman accepting his fate. But Jessie could feel the tension in his body, the barely controlled fury radiating from him like heat. She had just married a stranger, and he knew she was an impostor. The wedding night loomed ahead of them like a storm on the horizon, dark and inevitable. The wedding night chamber had been prepared with meticulous care. Rose petals scattered across pristine white linens, candles flickered in silver holders, casting warm light across walls hung with tapestries depicting romantic scenes from mythology. A fire burned low in the hearth. The air smelled of lavender and beeswax. Jessie stood in the center of the room, still wearing the wedding gown, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She had been left alone for nearly an hour while the last guests departed, while servants cleared the hall, while the household settled into the rhythm of evening. Now she heard footsteps in the corridor, heavy, measured, deliberately slow. The door opened. Charlie entered and closed it behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo in the silence. He had removed his formal jacket and wore only his shirt and waistcoat, the top button undone. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had run his hands through it repeatedly. His grey eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He said nothing, simply stood there, studying her with the same clinical assessment his mother had used hours earlier. Jessie forced herself to meet his gaze. If he was going to condemn her, she would face it with whatever dignity she could salvage. "You are not Eleanor Harrington," he said finally. His voice was quiet but edged with steel. "No, Your Grace, I am not. Who are you?" "My name is Jessie Miller. I'm an orphan from a charity house in London. Your mother brought me here today and commanded me to take Miss Harrington's place." Charlie's jaw tightened. She moved across the room to a side table where crystal decanters held amber liquid. He poured himself a generous measure and drank it in one swallow. Then he poured another. "My mother," he repeated, his voice bitter. Of course. She would consider this an acceptable solution. "I had no choice," Jessie said, her voice stronger now. She needed him to understand that, at least. "I was given no explanation, no time to refuse. I was dressed, instructed, and walked down that aisle before I fully comprehended what was happening." Charlie turned to face her fully. "And yet you said the vows. You looked me in the eye and lied." The accusation stung because it was true. Jessie's hands clenched in the folds of her gown. "What would you have had me do, Your Grace? Announce the deception before hundreds of witnesses? Humiliate you further? I am 19 years old with no family, no money, no power. Your mother is a duchess. Tell me, what choice did I truly have?" The question hung between them. Charlie set down his glass with more force than necessary. He walked to the window, staring out at the dark grounds, his back rigid with tension. "None," he admitted after a long moment. "You had no choice." He turned to face her again, and something in his expression had shifted. The anger was still there, but underneath it she could see exhaustion, and perhaps, reluctantly, understanding. "It appears we are both victims of circumstance, Miss Miller. Though you at least had no prior knowledge of what was being arranged." Jessie felt her shoulders drop slightly. Tension she had not realized she was carrying beginning to ease. "You are not angry with me." "Oh, I am furious," Charlie said, but a wry smile touched his lips. "Simply not at you. My anger is reserved for Eleanor, who fled without a word, and for my mother, who orchestrated this farce. You are merely the unwitting player in their drama." He crossed to a chair near the fire and sat, gesturing for her to do the same. Jessie gathered her skirts and perched on the edge of the opposite chair, the wedding gown pooling around her like a silk cage. "Tell me about yourself," Charlie said. "Not the orphan from the charity house. You. Who is Jessie Miller when no one is forcing her to be someone else?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. She hesitated, searching for words. "I like to read," she said finally. "I taught myself, using books from the charity house library. I would read at night when everyone else slept. Poetry, mostly. Some history. Once a book about astronomy that I did not entirely understand, but found beautiful nonetheless." Charlie's eyebrows rose. "You taught yourself." The matrons believed education wasted on charity girls, but I watched the younger children during their lessons and memorized what I could. Her hands twisted in her lap. "I know it was improper. Girls of my station are meant to know needlework and service, nothing more." "To hell with improper," Charlie said, and the sudden vehemence in his voice made her look up sharply. "You took what little was available to you and made something of it. That speaks to character, Miss Miller." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Tell me, what did you think of the astronomy book?" Despite everything, despite the absurdity of their situation, Jessie felt a smile tug at her lips. "I thought it was miraculous that someone had determined the distance to stars. That human beings could look at points of light and calculate their position in the heavens. It made me feel very small, and somehow very significant at the same time." Charlie studied her with an expression she could not quite read. "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect? I am not certain. Someone more—" He paused, searching for the word. calculating perhaps, someone who saw an opportunity and seized it. Jessie's smile faded. If that were true, Your Grace, I would have at least negotiated better terms before agreeing. The comment was bold, possibly too bold, but it startled a laugh from Charlie, an actual laugh, short and surprised, that transformed his severe features into something more human. God help me, he said, shaking his head. You may be the only honest person in this entire household. A week passed. The official story spread through society was that the Duke had married in a small private ceremony due to his bride's delicate constitution. No one questioned it. Dukes were eccentric. Privacy was respected when one had sufficient rank. Jessie found herself inhabiting a strange new existence. She had her own chambers connected to Charlie's through a shared sitting room. Servants addressed her as Your Grace and curtsied when she passed. She wore gowns that cost more than she had once earned in a year. She learned which fork to use for which course, how to hold a teacup, the proper way to address a countess versus a baroness. But she also discovered unexpected kindnesses. Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper, had known Jessie's father years ago when he supplied fabric to the estate. She taught Jessie the household routines with patient understanding. The cook sent up special pastries when he noticed she barely touched the elaborate dinners. Even some of the younger maids offered shy smiles when they thought no one was watching. Charlie maintained a careful distance, polite, formal. They took breakfast together in the morning room, discussing neutral topics like weather and estate business. He had begun teaching her about the property's operations, explaining tenant relationships and agricultural cycles with the same patient tone he might use with a favored student. Jessie sensed he was deciding what to do with her. The marriage was legal, but unconsummated. An annulment remained possible if he chose to pursue it. She existed in a kind of limbo, neither fully wife nor merely impostor. Then Lady Beatrice Moore arrived for an extended visit. She swept into the drawing room one afternoon, while Jessie attempted needlework, her elegant travelling costume making Jessie feel like a child playing dress-up. Lady Beatrice was perhaps 30, beautiful in a cold, perfect way, with blonde hair arranged in an elaborate style and eyes like blue ice. Cousin, she greeted Charlie with a kiss on the cheek before turning those assessing eyes on Jessie. And you must be the mysterious bride. How fascinating that we have not met before. I thought I knew all of Eleanor's acquaintances. Jessie's hands stilled on her embroidery. Lady Beatrice, she acknowledged carefully. You seem to have adapted remarkably well to your new position, Lady Beatrice continued, settling gracefully onto the settee. So many girls would be overwhelmed by the responsibilities of being a duchess, but you carry yourself with such confidence, as if you were born to it. The words sounded like compliments, but landed like accusations. Jessie met her gaze steadily. One learns to adapt quickly when circumstances demand it, my lady. Indeed, Lady Beatrice murmured, her smile sharp. How very resourceful of you. That evening, Jessie found the first letter slipped under her door. Plain paper, no signature, written in an elegant hand. Everyone will soon know who you really are. Did you truly believe you could deceive society forever? Jessie's hands trembled as she held the paper. She should tell Charlie, show him the threat. But something held her back. What if he decided the risk of scandal was too great? What if this gave him the excuse he needed to end their strange arrangement? She burned the letter in her fireplace and watched the edges curl black, the words disappearing into ash. 3 days later, walking in the gardens on a grey afternoon, she encountered Charlie returning from a ride. He dismounted when he saw her, leading his horse alongside as they strolled the gravel paths between bare flower beds waiting for spring. You have been quiet lately, he observed. I have been adjusting. To life as a duchess or to life as an impostor? His tone was gentle, not accusatory. Both, perhaps. She glanced at him sideways. Do you regret it? The marriage? Charlie was silent for a long moment, his boots crunching on gravel. I regret the deception, he said finally. I regret that you were used, but I find I do not regret you. The words settled over her like warmth. Jessie's breath caught. They continued walking, and their shoulders brushed, just barely, a contact so slight it might have been accidental, but neither moved away. Charlie offered his arm to help her navigate a set of stone steps, and when Jessie's gloved fingers curled around his sleeve, she felt the firmness of muscle beneath the fabric. Their eyes met, held, and something passed between them that neither quite understood. It was only a moment, but it was enough to change everything. Winter arrived at Whitmore Hall with frost that turned the windows into crystallized art, and mornings so cold that breath formed clouds even inside the vast chambers. Jessie had been the Duchess of Whitmore for nearly 6 weeks, and the role had begun to feel less like a costume and more like a skin she might someday grow into. Then the Harrington carriage appeared at the end of the long drive. Jessie was in the library when the commotion began. Raised voices in the entrance hall, the clatter of footsteps, the unmistakable tone of the Dowager Duchess issuing commands. She set down the volume of Byron she had been reading and moved to the doorway, her heart already beginning to race with premonition. Through the hall's tall windows, she could see a woman descending from the carriage. Even at a distance, her bearing spoke of aristocratic breeding, blonde hair arranged beneath a traveling bonnet, a cloak trimmed with fur, the way she held her head, the deliberate grace of her movements. This was a woman accustomed to being watched, admired, obeyed. Eleanor Harrington had returned. Jessie's first instinct was to flee, to run back to her chambers and hide like the impostor she was. But she forced herself to remain still, to breathe, to observe. Eleanor's face, now visible as she climbed the front steps, was lovely in a fragile way. Pale skin, delicate features, eyes that looked simultaneously haunted and determined. The Dowager Duchess received her in the formal drawing room, and the door closed firmly behind them. Servants whispered in corners. The head footman wore an expression of barely contained alarm. Even Mrs. Henderson, usually unflappable, clutched her keyring with white knuckles. Charlie was somewhere on the estate, meeting with his land steward. No one had yet gone to fetch him. Perhaps they were all waiting to see what Eleanor would say first. Jessie found herself walking toward the drawing room as if pulled by invisible strings. She should not listen at doors like a common servant, but this concerned her life, her future, her tenuous claim to a position she had never asked for. She pressed close to the wall near the door, holding her breath. "I fled because I was terrified." Eleanor's voice carried through the heavy wood, clear and cultured. "But these weeks alone have shown me that freedom without purpose is merely another kind of prison. I was wrong to run. I am prepared now to fulfill my duty." "The duty you abandoned on your wedding day?" The Dowager Duchess's voice was ice. "The duty that required me to find a replacement to save this family from ruin? I know what I have done." Eleanor sounded close to tears. "I know the scandal I nearly caused. I am here to make amends, to take my rightful place as the Duke's wife. That position is occupied by a girl plucked from a charity house because she happened to resemble me." Eleanor's voice grew stronger. "Surely you cannot believe that marriage is valid. She is no one. I am Eleanor Harrington. This was always meant to be my life." Jessie's chest tightened. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. She was no one. She had no claim except the vows spoken under false pretenses. She fled before she could hear the Dowager Duchess's response, her slippers silent on the marble as she hurried through corridors that suddenly felt like a maze designed to trap her. She found herself in the conservatory, a glass-walled room filled with exotic plants that somehow thrived despite the winter cold outside. The door opened behind her. Jessie spun, expecting servants or perhaps the Dowager Duchess come to inform her that her brief tenure as Duchess had ended. But it was Eleanor. They stood facing each other across a distance of perhaps 10 feet, two women whose lives had become impossibly entangled. Up close, Eleanor was even more beautiful than Jessie had realized, but there were shadows beneath her eyes, a tightness around her mouth that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. "You are Jessie Miller," Eleanor said. It was not a question. "I am. I suppose I should hate you. You took what was meant to be mine." Jessie felt a flash of anger cut through her fear. "I took nothing, Miss Harrington. I was given no choice. Same as you were given no choice in your arranged marriage. The difference is that I did not have the luxury of running away. Eleanor flinched as if struck. That landed like the truth it was. She moved closer, her silk skirts rustling against the plants. I did not come here to fight with you. I came because I owed you the courtesy of meeting you face to face. Why did you return? Jessie asked, genuinely wanting to understand. You had your freedom. You could have built a new life. Freedom, Eleanor repeated bitterly. Do you know what I discovered about freedom, Miss Miller? That it means nothing when you are entirely alone. That the world is remarkably unkind to women without family, fortune, or husband. She sank onto a nearby bench, her perfect posture finally crumbling. I lived in a boarding house in Brighton. I took work as a governess under a false name. The children were cruel, the parents dismissive, and every night I lay awake wondering if this was truly preferable to a loveless but comfortable marriage. You could have married someone else, someone you chose. Who? Eleanor looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. I am ruined goods now, Miss Miller. The daughter who fled her wedding. What respectable man would have me? And without the Harrington name behind me, without connections or dowry, I am worth nothing on the marriage market. The raw honesty of it left Jessie speechless. She had not considered Eleanor's perspective, had not imagined that the girl who fled might have her own prison waiting beyond Whitmore Hall's gates. I am sorry, Jessie said finally, and meant it, for what you suffered, for what you lost. But I cannot simply step aside and disappear. I have nowhere to go. I am legally the Duke's wife. Are you? Eleanor's voice was gentle now, almost curious. Has the marriage been consummated? Heat flooded Jessie's face. That is not... It matters, Eleanor interrupted, for an annulment. If the marriage remains unconsummated, it can be dissolved. You could return to your life. I could claim what was always meant to be mine. Everyone could move forward. Except I have no life to return to, Jessie said quietly, and I am not certain I wish to. She met Eleanor's gaze directly. I have grown fond of this place, of the work I have begun here, of... She stopped herself before she could say his name. Of my intended husband, Eleanor finished for her. Oh, Miss Miller, you have fallen in love with him. I have not. The denial came too quickly, too forcefully. Then why are your hands trembling? Why do you look as though I have just threatened to take your whole world? Before Jessie could respond, the conservatory door opened again. Charlie stood in the doorway, still wearing his riding clothes, his expression unreadable, as his eyes moved from Eleanor to Jessie and back again. So it is true, he said quietly. You have returned, Eleanor. Your Grace. Eleanor rose, executing a perfect curtsy. I have come to make amends for my cowardice and to discuss the future. Charlie's gaze shifted to Jessie. Are you well? The question, directed at her rather than at his former intended bride, sent warmth through Jessie's chest. I am, Your Grace. Good. He looked back at Eleanor. Then we shall discuss this matter in a civilized fashion. I have called for my mother, the family solicitor, and several advisers. They will convene in the Great Hall within the hour. We will address this situation properly, with all parties present and all options considered. Eleanor's face paled. You mean to put my fate to a vote? I mean to ensure that whatever decision is made, it is made with full knowledge and consent of everyone involved. Charlie's voice was firm but not unkind. You made your choice 6 weeks ago, Eleanor. Others have had to live with the consequences. Now we shall determine what comes next, together. He turned and left without another word, leaving the two women alone once more in the glass room, surrounded by winter-blooming flowers that should not have survived but somehow did. Eleanor looked at Jessie with something that might have been respect. He defends you. He defends justice, Jessie corrected. But her heart was pounding, because she knew Eleanor was at least partially right. Charlie had stood in that doorway, and his first concern had been for Jessie's well-being, not Eleanor's return. The hour passed too quickly and too slowly all at once. Jessie changed into one of her simpler gowns, a deep blue that Charlie had once complimented. She brushed her hair and pinned it up with hands that shook only slightly. In the mirror, she looked like a duchess. She had to trust that might be enough. The Great Hall had been transformed into a kind of courtroom. A long table dominated the center, with chairs arranged around it. The Dowager Duchess sat at one end, her expression inscrutable. Mr. Pemberton, the solicitor, arranged papers before him. Several men Jessie did not recognize, presumably family advisors or members of the aristocracy, with some stake in the outcome, occupied other seats. Lady Beatrice lounged in a chair near the back, her eyes bright with anticipation. Charlie sat at the head of the table. He gestured for Jessie to take the chair at his right hand and for Eleanor to sit at his left. The symbolism was clear. Both women had equal standing in this proceeding. "Let us begin," Charlie said, and his voice carried through the hall with the authority of generations of dukes before him. The future hung in the balance, and Jessie Miller, who had once been no one, found herself fighting for a life she had never chosen, but could no longer imagine losing. If you have been drawn into this journey of unexpected love and impossible choices, I would be honored if you would subscribe to this channel. And tell me, what would you do in Jessie's position? Would you fight for a marriage born of deception, or step aside for the woman who fled? Leave your thoughts below. I read every comment and your perspective matters to me. The silence in the great hall was absolute. Even the fire seemed to burn more quietly, as if the flames understood the gravity of what was unfolding. Mr. Pemberton cleared his throat. "The matter before us is unprecedented. We have a legal marriage contracted in good faith, but executed under false pretenses. We also have the original intended bride who has returned claiming her rightful place." An elderly baron leaned forward. "The marriage can be annulled on grounds of fraud." The Duke was deceived about his bride's identity. Lady Beatrice's voice cut through the murmuring. "Surely the solution is obvious. Annul the fraudulent marriage, restore Miss Harrington, and pension off the girl who played her part. No lasting harm done." No lasting harm. Charlie's voice was dangerously quiet. "You speak as if Miss Miller is a hired actress. She is my wife in the eyes of God and the law." "A wife acquired through deception," Lady Beatrice countered. "Surely you cannot claim attachment to a woman you have known mere weeks." The Dowager Duchess rose, every inch the matriarch. "My son is correct that the marriage is legal. However, we must consider what is best for the family. Miss Harrington's bloodline, her connections, her training since birth. These are not insignificant factors." Jessie felt each word like a blade. She had no bloodline worth mentioning, no connections, no training except what she had desperately absorbed in 6 weeks. Eleanor stood. "May I speak?" The Dowager Duchess nodded. Eleanor withdrew a folded paper from her reticule, her hands trembling. "Before I fled, I wrote a letter. I left it in my chamber." She unfolded it carefully. "Miss Miller found it among my belongings. She has not shown it to anyone. I believe she has been protecting me, even though doing so might cost her everything." Every eye turned to Jessie. She kept her gaze fixed on the table, barely breathing. Eleanor's voice strengthened. "To the Duke of Whitmore, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I cannot marry you, not because you are unworthy, but because I am. I cannot love a man I did not choose. I cannot spend my life as a piece in someone else's strategy. I pray that somehow, someday, you will find a woman capable of loving you as you deserve, a woman who sees you, not your title, who chooses you, not the life you can provide. Forgive me for my cowardice, but more than that, forgive me for wasting your time when your heart deserved better." The letter trembled in Eleanor's hands. Tears streamed down her face. "I wrote those words and I meant them, but I was too afraid to face the consequences. So I ran like a child, and others paid the price for my fear." Eleanor turned to Jessie. "You asked why I returned. The truth is, I came back because I thought I had no choice. But standing here now, seeing how you have carried a burden that should have been mine, I realize I am still being selfish." She faced Charlie. "Your Grace, when we were children, our fathers arranged our betrothal. We had no say. But Miss Miller made vows to you as a grown woman with full knowledge of what she was accepting. Her marriage to you may have begun in deception, but it has been lived in truth. Mine would have been a lie from the first moment." The room erupted into whispers. Lady Beatrice's face paled. Charlie stood. His chair scraped against the floor, cutting through the noise. Everyone fell silent. "I have heard enough." His grey eyes settled on his mother. "You orchestrated this deception to save our family from scandal. You gave Miss Miller no choice. For that, I am both grateful and furious." He turned to Eleanor. "You fled because you feared a loveless marriage. I do not blame you for that fear. But you abandoned your responsibilities without considering the cost to others." Eleanor bowed her head, accepting the judgment. Finally, Charlie's gaze found Jessie. She forced herself to meet his eyes, though her entire future hung on his next words. "Jessie," he said, "you were brought here under false pretenses, dressed in another woman's gown, made to speak vows without my knowledge. You could have refused. You could have exposed the deception. But you did what you thought would cause the least harm." He moved until he stood directly before her. Jessie's heart hammered. "In these 6 weeks, you have learned our ways with remarkable speed. You have shown kindness to servants who expected none. You have carried yourself with dignity, even when you must have felt terrified." Charlie reached for her hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "More than that, you have made me laugh. You have challenged my assumptions. You have reminded me that rank and bloodline are not the same as character and worth." He turned back to the assembly, still holding her hand. "Before this family, before these witnesses, I declare that Jessie Miller is my wife, not because she was forced to be, not because of legal technicalities, but because she has earned the right to stand beside me, and because I find that I do not wish to stand beside anyone else." The Dowager Duchess rose. "Charles, you cannot be serious. I am thinking of the woman who reads astronomy books by candlelight because no one thought to teach her. I am thinking of someone who sees servants as human beings. I am thinking of a woman who, when given power she never asked for, has used it with more wisdom than most born to it." Charlie looked at Jessie, and the warmth in his gaze made her breath catch. "I am thinking that perhaps Eleanor was right in her letter. Perhaps I do deserve someone who chooses me, and I choose to believe that given true freedom, Jessie might one day choose me as well. Lord Pemberton, is there any legal impediment to this marriage?" The solicitor shuffled his papers. "The marriage is valid, Your Grace. Unconventional, certainly, but valid. If Miss Harrington does not contest it, there is no grounds for annulment. Then it is settled. Jessie Miller is the Duchess of Whitmore. This council is concluded." Lady Beatrice swept from the room, fury evident in every line of her posture. The advisers said nothing. They knew better than to argue with a duke who had made up his mind. The Dowager Duchess remained seated. After a long moment she inclined her head. "It seems my son has developed a will of his own." "Very well. The marriage stands." Eleanor approached them. "I wish you both happiness. Truly. And Miss Miller, thank you for finding my letter. You could have destroyed it." Jessie found her voice. "Where will you go?" Eleanor smiled sadly. "My father has a sister in Bath. She has offered me a home. Perhaps in time I can rebuild some kind of life." She curtsied to Charlie. "Your Grace, I release you from any obligation. Be happy. That is all I ever wanted for either of us." She left without another word, her footsteps echoing until the door closed behind her. The advisers filed out. Servants extinguished candles. Within minutes, only Charlie and Jessie remained in the vast hall, still holding hands. "You defended me," Jessie said quietly, "before your entire family." Charlie's thumb traced circles on her hand. "I defended the truth, and perhaps what I hope might someday become more than a marriage of convenience." Jessie looked up at him, at the strong lines of his face, the grey eyes that now held warmth. "What if it already has become more?" His eyes widened. "Has it? I do not know what love is supposed to feel like. I only know that when Eleanor said I could return to my old life, my first thought was that I have no old life. My second thought was that even if I did, I would not want it. Not anymore." Charlie's other hand cupped her face. "Jessie," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a question and an answer all at once. "Yes," she whispered. "May I kiss you? Not because ceremony demands it, not because we are being watched, but because I very much want to, and I wish to know that you want it too." Jessie rose on her toes and closed the distance between them. Their lips met softly at first, tentative, exploring. Then Charlie's arms came around her, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that made Jessie's knees weak and her heart race. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Charlie rested his forehead against hers. "I believe I am beginning to understand why Eleanor wrote what she did, about finding someone who sees past the title. And I am beginning to understand that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to exactly where we need to be." 3 weeks after the council, as winter began loosening its grip on the countryside, Charlie made an announcement at breakfast. "I wish to renew our vows," he said, setting down his teacup. "Properly this time. No deception, no audience of strangers. Just us, choosing each other before God." Jessie's heart stuttered. "You mean it?" "I have never meant anything more." The ceremony was arranged for the following Sunday in the estate's small chapel, a stone building that dated back 2 centuries. Unlike the grand hall where their first wedding had taken place, this space felt intimate, almost sacred. Wooden pews worn smooth by generations of worshippers, simple stained glass that painted the floor in patterns of blue and gold, the scent of old stone and beeswax. Jessie chose her gown carefully, not the elaborate silk confection Eleanor had left behind, but something she had made herself over the past weeks. White muslin, simple in cut but embroidered with tiny flowers along the hem and sleeves. The work had taken her evening after evening, each stitch a meditation, a prayer, a promise to herself that this time would be different. She wore her mother's ribbon in her hair. The pale blue silk was faded now, worn at the edges, but it was the only thing she possessed that connected her to a life before the charity house. Her mother had died when Jessie was 6, and the ribbon was all she had salvaged when her father's creditors came. When she entered the chapel, only a handful of people waited. Mrs. Henderson sat in the front pew, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The estate chaplain stood ready at the altar. Even the Dowager Duchess had come, though she sat in the back, her expression unreadable, but her presence a form of acceptance Jessie had not expected. And Charlie stood at the altar, watching her approach with such intensity that Jessie felt heat rise in her cheeks. He wore a simple dark suit rather than military regalia. His hair was slightly tousled, as if he had been running his hands through it nervously. When their eyes met, he smiled, and the warmth in that smile made Jessie's breath catch. She walked toward him slowly, savoring each step, each moment. This was real. This was her choice. When she reached him, Charlie took both her hands in his. The chaplain began to speak, but Jessie barely heard the words. All her attention focused on the man before her, on the way his thumbs traced gentle circles on her palms, on the emotion she could see flickering behind his carefully controlled expression. "Charles Edmund Whitmore," the chaplain intoned, "do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward?" "I do," Charlie said, his voice steady and sure. And then, departing from tradition, he continued, "I promise to honor not only your position as my Duchess, but your intelligence, your strength, and your incredible capacity for kindness. I promise to see you, Jessie, not the role you were forced to play, but the woman you truly are." Jessie felt tears prick at her eyes. "And do you, Jessie Marie Miller, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." Her voice emerged stronger than she expected. "I promise partnership, honesty, and whatever love I am capable of giving. I promise to stand beside you not because I must, but because I choose to." The chaplain smiled. "Then by the grace of God and with the blessing of those present, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may seal your vows with a kiss." Charlie's hands came up to frame her face, his touch tender. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to close the distance if she wished. Jessie rose on her toes to meet him. The kiss began soft, almost chaste, but quickly deepened. Charlie's arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer. Jessie's hands found their way to his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palms. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and the small gathering erupted in gentle applause. A simple meal followed in the private dining room. Wine was poured. Mrs. Henderson made a toast that left half the table in tears. Even the Dowager Duchess raised her glass, though her words were measured. To my son and his wife. May you find happiness in unexpected places. As evening fell, Jessie found herself back in her chambers, heart racing with anticipation and nervousness. A maid had helped her change into a nightgown of soft white cotton with delicate lace at the throat and wrists. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, and she stood barefoot on the thick carpet, waiting. The connecting door opened. Charlie entered, still dressed but with his jacket and waistcoat removed, his shirt open at the collar. He stopped just inside the room, his eyes moving over her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. "You are beautiful," he said quietly. "I am terrified," she admitted. "So am I." He moved closer, each step deliberate. "Jessie, we need not rush. We can wait as long as you need." She reached out and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I do not want to wait anymore." Charlie's breath hitched. "Are you certain?" In answer, Jessie stood on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss ignited something between them, months of restrained desire finally given permission to emerge. Charlie's arms came around her, one hand tangling in her hair while the other pressed against the small of her back, drawing her against him. They stumbled toward the bed, neither willing to break contact. Charlie's fingers found the small buttons at her throat, working them open with surprising gentleness. Jessie's hands explored the planes of his chest through his shirt, feeling the warmth of his skin, the tension in his muscles. When her nightgown slipped from her shoulders, pooling at her feet, Charlie pulled back just enough to look at her. His eyes were dark with want, but also with tenderness. "You are extraordinary," he whispered. Jessie reached for his shirt, and together they removed the barriers between them. Skin met skin, and Jessie gasped at the sensation. Charlie guided her to the bed, laying her down with such care she might have been made of glass. His lips traced a path along her jaw, down her throat, across her collarbone. Jessie's fingers tangled in his hair, holding him close. Every touch felt like discovery, like learning a language they had only ever spoken in fragments before. "Are you all right?" Charlie asked, his voice rough against her ear. "Yes," she breathed. "Do not stop." What followed was tender and passionate, awkward in moments but beautiful in its honesty. Charlie moved with her, not just over her, responding to her gasps and sighs, learning what made her fingers tighten on his shoulders, what drew soft sounds from her throat. Jessie surrendered to sensation, to the pleasure building between them, to the overwhelming intimacy of being truly known. When they finally collapsed together, breathless and tangled in sheets, Charlie pulled her close against his chest, his heart hammered beneath her ear. Her fingers traced idle patterns on his skin, marveling that this was allowed now, that this belonged to them. "I did not know it could be like that," Jessie whispered. "Like what?" "Like something shared rather than something taken." Charlie's arms tightened around her. It should always be shared, always a gift freely given. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Thank you for trusting me with this. With you." They lay in comfortable silence for a long while, the fire burning low in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Outside, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "Charlie," Jessie said eventually. "Do you believe people can fall in love after they are already married? I believe we are proving that very thing." He shifted so he could see her face. "Are you telling me you're falling in love with me, wife?" Jessie felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she met his gaze steadily. "I believe I might have already fallen. I just did not recognize it until now." Charlie's smile was radiant. "Then I am the most fortunate man alive, because I fell in love with you the day you told me about reading astronomy books by candlelight. I simply had to wait for my heart to admit what it already knew." He kissed her again, soft and sweet, and they began to discover each other anew, taking their time now, learning that passion could be both fierce and gentle, that desire could coexist with tenderness, that love made every touch sacred. The night stretched before them, full of whispered words and shared breath, of hands learning the landscape of skin, of two people who had been forced together by circumstance, choosing each other again and again, until choosing became as natural as breathing. Spring transformed Whitmore Hall from a fortress of stone and duty into something softer, more alive. Daffodils carpeted the grounds in waves of yellow. Cherry trees exploded into clouds of pale pink blossoms. The air smelled of new grass and possibility. Jessie stood at the window of what had become their shared bedchamber, watching gardeners prepare the flower beds. Behind her, Charlie emerged from his dressing room, adjusting his cravat. He paused to wrap his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What occupies your thoughts this morning, wife?" Jessie leaned back against him. "I have been thinking about the girls at the charity house. How many are there right now, believing their lives are already decided, believing they have no choices?" Charlie pressed a kiss to her temple. "What would you do for them if you could?" She turned in his arms to face him. "I would open a school. Not just for needlework and service, but for reading, writing, mathematics. I would teach them that their circumstances do not define their worth or their potential." "Then do it," Charlie said simply. Jessie blinked. "Just like that. Just like that. You are the Duchess of Whitmore. You have resources at your disposal. Use them." Within a week, plans were underway. Charlie identified a vacant building in the nearby town of Ashford, a former merchant's hall that had stood empty for 2 years. Jessie hired 2 teachers, both women who had struggled to find positions because they believed education should not be limited by class or gender. The school opened on a Tuesday morning in April. 15 girls arrived, ranging in age from 7 to 16. They came from tenant farms, from the town's poorer neighborhoods, from circumstances that offered them little beyond hard labor and limited prospects. Jessie greeted each one at the door, learning their names, looking them in the eyes. "I'm Jessie Whitmore," she said. "I grew up in a charity house in London. I taught myself to read by stealing moments with books that were not meant for girls like me. You are here because you deserve better than stolen moments. You are here because you matter." The youngest girl, a 7-year-old named Beth with tangled brown hair and a dress held together with careful patches, stared up at Jessie with wide eyes. "You were in a charity house? Like us?" "Just like you," Jessie confirmed. "And now I stand here as a duchess. Not because I was born to it, but because I refuse to believe my beginning determined my ending." 3 times each week, Jessie traveled to the school. She taught reading to the younger girls, using the same books of poetry that had opened the world to her. She brought slates and chalk so they could practice their letters. She arranged for the local baker to provide simple meals, knowing hungry children could not focus on learning. The older girls learned mathematics, enough to manage household accounts or even assist in shops. They studied history, geography, the basic principles of science. Jessie watched their faces transform as knowledge opened doors they had not known existed. At Whitmore Hall, the servants noticed the change in their duchess. She walked with more confidence now, her purpose clear. She still asked after their families, still learned their names. But now she also discussed ideas, shared what she was learning, treated them as thinking individuals rather than simply staff. Mrs. Henderson found Jessie in the library one afternoon, surrounded by books about educational reform and women's rights. "Your Grace, you have a visitor." Lady Beatrice entered, her travelling costume impeccable as always. She had been absent from Whitmore Hall since the council, and her return was unexpected. "Cousin Beatrice," Jessie greeted her carefully. "This is a surprise." Lady Beatrice studied Jessie with those sharp blue eyes. "I came to see if the rumours were true. They say you have opened a school for common girls. I have, and that you teach them yourself, that you sit beside them as if you were their equal." "I am their equal in every way that matters," Jessie replied evenly. "We all deserve the chance to learn, to grow, to become more than circumstances would dictate." Lady Beatrice was silent for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. It was not her usual cold smile, but something more genuine. "I underestimated you, Miss Miller. I thought you were merely lucky. I see now you are extraordinary." Jessie felt her eyebrows rise. "I do not understand. I spent my life being told my value lay in my bloodline and my connections. I manipulated, I schemed, I tried to secure my position through the very systems that trapped me." Lady Beatrice moved to the window, looking out at the gardens. "You, on the other hand, were given nothing, and yet you have built something meaningful. You have used your position not to elevate yourself but to lift others. That takes a kind of courage I never possessed. What are you saying? I am saying I was wrong about you, and I am asking if your school might benefit from a donation. I have property in Northumberland that generates income. I would like to establish a fund for your educational efforts. Jessie stared at her. Why? Because watching you has taught me something important. Power without purpose is merely decoration. You have shown me what it means to actually matter. Lady Beatrice extended her hand. Will you accept my help? Jessie took her hand, feeling the firm grip. I will. Thank you. After Lady Beatrice departed, Jessie found Charlie in his study, reviewing estate ledgers. She told him about the unexpected visit, about the offered donation. Charlie set down his pen and pulled her into his lap. You are changing people, Jessie. Not just the girls at your school, but everyone who encounters you. You make them question what they thought they knew about worth and value. I am only doing what feels right. That is precisely what makes it remarkable. He kissed her softly. I am so proud of you. That evening, the Dowager Duchess requested Jessie's presence in her private sitting room. The invitation felt ominous, but Jessie went, smoothing her skirts as she entered the elegantly appointed space. The Dowager Duchess sat by the fire, a book in her lap. She gestured to the opposite chair. Sit, child. Jessie sat, spine straight, hands folded. I owe you an apology, the Dowager Duchess said without preamble. I used you abominably. I saw you as a solution to a problem, rather than as a person with your own dreams and fears. You saved your family from scandal, Jessie replied carefully. At your expense. The older woman's voice was steady, but not cold. I told myself the end justified the means, that you would be better off as a duchess than as a charity case, but I never gave you the choice. For that, I am sorry. The apology landed between them, unexpected and genuine. Jessie felt something tight in her chest begin to ease. I have been watching you these past months, the Dowager Duchess continued. The way you carry yourself, the kindness you show to everyone, regardless of station, the school you have built. You are a better duchess than I ever was. Your grace... No, let me finish. She leaned forward slightly. I spent my life maintaining appearances, protecting the family name, playing by rules written by men who never had to live under their weight. You are rewriting those rules. You are showing that nobility is about character, not bloodline. My son chose well when he chose to keep you as his wife. Thank you, Jessie whispered. The Dowager Duchess smiled, and it transformed her severe features into something almost warm. I am establishing a trust in your name. The income will support your educational endeavors indefinitely. Consider it recompense for what I took from you and investment in what you are building. Jessie felt tears prick her eyes. I do not know what to say. Say you will continue to teach my grandson or granddaughter, when the time comes, that true nobility lies in service and compassion. That is legacy enough. That evening, Jessie stood in the doorway of the school, watching the last of the students depart. Beth, the youngest, turned back to wave, her face lit with joy. In her hand, she clutched a book, her first, given to her by Jessie to take home and practice. Charlie appeared beside her, sliding his hand into hers. You are building something that will outlast us both. Jessie squeezed his fingers. We are building it. None of this would be possible without you. They walked back to the waiting carriage together, and Jessie realized with sudden clarity that she was happy. Not just content, not just comfortable, but genuinely deeply happy. The girl who had scrubbed laundry in a charity house now shaped futures. The impostor who had trembled at the altar now stood firm in her purpose. And the man beside her, the Duke who had every reason to resent the deception that bound them together, loved her with a steadiness that made everything else possible. Life had not turned out the way any of them had planned. But perhaps, Jessie thought as Charlie helped her into the carriage, the unexpected paths were the ones that led us exactly where we needed to be. The first signs came in late May. Jessie found herself unable to finish breakfast, the smell of eggs turning her stomach. She felt exhausted by midday, needing to rest when she normally would have been visiting the school. Her body felt different, unfamiliar, as if something fundamental had shifted. Mrs. Henderson noticed first. She found Jessie in the garden one afternoon, sitting on a bench with her eyes closed, one hand pressed to her abdomen. "How long has it been, Your Grace?" Jessie opened her eyes. "How long has what been?" "Since your monthly courses." Jessie counted backward in her mind, and her breath caught. "Nearly 2 months." "Oh." Mrs. Henderson smiled, her eyes crinkling with warmth. "I believe congratulations may be in order. Shall I send for the physician?" The doctor confirmed it that evening. Jessie sat in the examination room, hands clasped tightly in her lap, as he delivered the news with professional courtesy. "You are with child, Your Grace. I would estimate you are approximately 8 weeks along. If all continues well, you should expect to deliver in late January." Jessie pressed a hand to her stomach, feeling nothing yet but knowing everything had changed. A baby. She was going to be a mother. That night, she waited for Charlie in their sitting room, nervous energy making her pace the carpet. When he entered, still wearing his riding clothes after a day inspecting tenant farms, she could not find the words at first. "Jessie." He moved toward her, concern creasing his brow. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong." She took his hands, drawing him to sit beside her on the settee. "Something is very, very right. Tell me." "I am pregnant, Charlie." He went utterly still. For a heartbeat, Jessie feared she had misread everything, that perhaps he was not ready, that this would complicate rather than complete their happiness. Then he let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. His hands came up to frame her face, and she saw tears shining in his eyes. Truly? Truly. The doctor confirmed it today. Charlie pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. Then he loosened his grip immediately, pulling back with concern. "Did I hurt you?" "Should I not? I am pregnant, not made of glass." Jessie laughed, pulling him back to her. "You can still hold me." He pressed his forehead to hers, his hands gentle on her waist. "A child. Our child." His voice broke on the words. "Jessie, I cannot believe this is real, that you are real, that this life we have built together is real." "Believe it," she whispered. "We are going to be parents." They sat together for a long time, wrapped in each other, imagining the future taking shape inside her. Charlie's hand rested on her still flat stomach, and Jessie covered it with her own. "Do you hope for a boy or a girl?" she asked. "I hope for a healthy child with your courage and kindness. The rest does not matter." News of the pregnancy spread through Whitmore Hall like wildfire. Servants smiled when Jessie passed. The cook began preparing special meals designed for expectant mothers. The Dowager Duchess made an announcement that the family nursery, unused for nearly 3 decades, should be thoroughly cleaned and refurbished. But it was Charlie's father who surprised Jessie most. The elder Duke, whose health had been failing when she first arrived, had been recovering slowly. He now spent his days in a sunny room on the 2nd floor, reading and receiving occasional visitors. He sent word that he wished to see Jessie privately. She found him seated by a tall window overlooking the gardens, a blanket across his lap despite the warm weather. Age had thinned his frame, but his eyes were sharp and kind. "Come in, my dear. Sit with me." Jessie settled into the chair beside him. "You wish to see me, Your Grace. I wish to know the woman who has brought my son back to life." He studied her with interest. When Charles was young, he was full of laughter and curiosity. Then duty began to weigh on him, and he became what he thought a duke should be. Serious, controlled, distant. But these past months, I have watched him transform back into the man he was meant to be. That is your doing. "I only loved him," Jessie said quietly. "That is all, that is everything." The elder Duke reached out and patted her hand. "I have heard about your school, about the girls you are teaching, the lives you are changing. That takes vision and courage. I had good teachers. People who showed me kindness when they did not have to. And now you are passing that forward." He leaned back in his chair. "I have decided to make an announcement. I am establishing a permanent endowment for your educational work, enough to ensure the school continues long after we are all gone. And I am hosting a formal presentation in London during the season. You will be introduced to society properly, not as the girl who replaced Eleanor Harrington, but as the Duchess of Whitmore, who has earned that title through merit and character." Jessie felt overwhelmed. "Your Grace, that is too generous. It is precisely generous enough." His expression grew serious. "I spent my life believing bloodline mattered above all else. You have taught me, in my final years, that I was wrong. Character matters. Compassion matters. You will teach my grandchild these truths from birth. That is worth more than any title or fortune." The presentation took place in late June at one of London's grandest ballrooms. Jessie wore a gown of deep emerald silk that accommodated her gently rounding belly. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears, gifts from the Dowager Duchess. Her hair was arranged in an elegant style, and when she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Charlie stood beside her as they entered the ballroom, his hand warm and steady on her arm. Hundreds of candles blazed in crystal chandeliers. The cream of London society filled the space, lords and ladies, politicians and merchants, everyone who mattered in the complex web of English aristocracy. The elder Duke stood at the center of the room, his frame supported by a cane, but his voice strong as he called for attention. He spoke of family, of duty, of the unexpected paths that sometimes led to the greatest blessings. Then he gestured to Jessie and Charlie. "I present to you the Duke and Duchess of Whitmore, my son and his remarkable wife, who has shown us all that nobility is not inherited, but earned through service and compassion." The applause started slowly, then built into something that made the chandeliers tremble. Ladies approached to offer congratulations on the pregnancy. Gentlemen discussed the educational endowment with genuine interest. Those who had once whispered about the mysterious circumstances of the marriage now spoke only of the Duchess's charitable works and gracious demeanor. Jessie moved through the evening in a kind of daze, accepting compliments, engaging in conversation, representing everything she had once believed herself incapable of becoming. Late in the evening, she found a moment of quiet on a balcony overlooking the London streets. Charlie joined her, slipping his arm around her waist. "Tired? Overwhelmed," she admitted. "6 months ago, I was scrubbing floors in a charity house. Now I stand in a ballroom wearing diamonds, carrying the heir to a dukedom, being celebrated by people who would not have looked at me twice. 6 months ago, I was resigned to a loveless arranged marriage." Charlie turned her to face him. "Now I have a wife I adore, a child on the way, and a future I actually want to live. We are both different people than we were. Better people? Happy people." He kissed her softly. "That is better than anything else." They stood together on the balcony, watching London's gaslit streets, feeling the child move between them for the first time. A tiny flutter, barely perceptible but unmistakable. Jessie gasped, pressing Charlie's hand more firmly against her stomach. "Did you feel that?" "I did." Wonder filled his voice. Our child, Jessie, already making their presence known. "Just like their mother," she said with a smile, unexpected and impossible to ignore. Charlie laughed, the sound full of joy, and pulled her close. They stayed there until the night air grew cool, reluctant to return to the glittering ballroom, content simply to be together in this moment that belonged only to them. The girl who had been no one was now someone who mattered. And the child growing inside her would be born into a world transformed by the simple revolutionary act of an orphan being seen as fully human, fully worthy, fully capable of extraordinary things. January brought snow to Whitmore Hall, transforming the estate into a world of pristine white. Inside, fires blazed in every hearth, and the household moved with quiet efficiency, preparing for the arrival that would change everything. Jessie's labor began on a Tuesday morning, just as pale sunlight broke through winter clouds. The pain started gently, then built with relentless intensity. Mrs. Henderson took charge, summoning the physician and midwife, while Charlie paced the corridor outside their chambers like a caged animal. Hours passed. Day faded into evening. Charlie refused to leave, ignoring his mother's insistence that childbirth was no place for men. He sat just outside the door, listening to Jessie's labored breathing, her occasional cries, feeling utterly helpless. Finally, as midnight approached, he heard a new sound, a thin, wavering wail that grew stronger with each breath. The door opened. Mrs. Henderson emerged, her face wreathed in smiles despite her exhaustion. "Your Grace, you have a daughter, a healthy, perfect daughter, and the Duchess is well." Charlie nearly stumbled in his haste to enter the room. Jessie lay propped against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale but radiant. And in her arms, wrapped in soft white linen, lay a tiny creature with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in the entire world. Charlie knelt beside the bed, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch his daughter's impossibly small fingers. "She is perfect," he whispered. "She has your eyes," Jessie said softly. "Already looking at everything like she is trying to understand how the world works. What shall we name her?" They had discussed many names over the months, but now, looking at their daughter, only one felt right. "Grace," Jessie said, "for the grace that brought us together, for the grace that transformed something born of deception into something true." "Grace Margaret Whitmore," Charlie agreed, including his mother's name. "May she be as strong as her mother and as fortunate as her father." The baby's first weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Jessie nursed her daughter herself, refusing the wet nurse the Dowager Duchess insisted was proper for a woman of her station. She wanted these moments, this connection, this proof that Grace belonged to her in a way no one could ever take away. Charlie was equally besotted. He could be found at all hours in the nursery, holding Grace against his shoulder, talking to her in low tones about estate management and astronomy and the importance of kindness. The servants whispered that they had never seen a duke so thoroughly wrapped around his infant daughter's tiny fingers. Spring arrived again, completing a full year since Jessie had first been brought to Whitmore Hall. The gardens exploded into colour. The school in Ashford now had 30 students and plans to expand. Lady Beatrice's donation had made it possible to hire 2 additional teachers and provide books for every child. On a warm April afternoon, Jessie walked through the school with Grace strapped to her chest in a cloth carrier that scandalized the Dowager Duchess but delighted the students. The girls crowded around asking to see the baby, touching her tiny hands with reverent care. "Will she come to school here when she is older?" Beth asked. The 7-year-old was now 8 and reading at a level that astonished her teachers. "She will," Jessie confirmed. "Every girl deserves an education, whether she is born in a charity house or a ducal estate." That evening, as Jessie fed Grace in the rocking chair by the nursery window, Charlie entered carrying a leather-bound book. "What is that?" Jessie asked. "A gift. For our daughter." He opened it to show blank pages. "I thought we might record her story. Not just the expected milestones, but who she is, what she teaches us, how she changes the world." Jessie felt tears prick her eyes. "You are an extraordinary father. I am learning from an extraordinary mother." He sat on the floor beside the rocking chair, opening to the first page. "What should we write?" Jessie thought for a moment, then smiled. "Write this. Grace Margaret Whitmore was born on a winter night to parents who found each other in the most unexpected way. Her mother was once told she was nothing. Her father was once resigned to a life without love. Together they proved that the most beautiful stories often begin with the most unlikely circumstances." Charlie's pen moved across the page, capturing the words. When he finished, he looked up at Jessie with such love that her breath caught. "Do you ever regret it? The way we began?" "Never," Jessie said without hesitation. "If I could go back and choose differently, I would not. Because every difficult moment led me here. To you, to Grace, to a life I could never have imagined but cannot imagine living without." Years passed with the gentle inevitability of seasons turning. The school grew into 3 buildings, educating over 100 girls at a time. Former students began returning as teachers themselves, having found positions or even started businesses with the skills Jessie had given them. Grace grew from infant to toddler to curious child, asking questions about everything, showing the same hunger for knowledge her mother possessed. She played with the children at the school, learning early that people mattered more than position. The story of the orphan who became Duchess and transformed what that title meant spread beyond Whitmore. Other estates began establishing schools. Women of rank started questioning the limitations placed upon them. Small changes, but changes nonetheless. On Grace's 5th birthday, Jessie and Charlie walked through the gardens where they had first felt that tentative spark of connection. Grace ran ahead, chasing butterflies, her laughter echoing across the grounds. Charlie took Jessie's hand, lacing their fingers together as naturally as breathing. "Do you remember the first time we walked here together, when our shoulders touched and we both pretended not to notice? I remember thinking you might send me away, that I was living on borrowed time. And now?" He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Now I know this is exactly where I belong." She looked up at him, at the face she knew as well as her own, at the man who had chosen to love her when he could have chosen otherwise. "You gave me something I never thought I would have, Charlie. A home, a purpose, a family. You gave me the same." He kissed her softly. "And you gave the world proof that grace and courage can transform anything." Grace came running back, clutching a handful of wildflowers. "Mama, Papa, look what I found." Jessie knelt to admire the slightly crushed blooms, and Charlie crouched beside her. Their daughter chattered about colors and petals, and Jessie felt overwhelming gratitude for this moment, this life, this unexpected blessing. The scandal that everyone had feared never materialized. Instead, a different story took root. The tale of a duke who learned to see past bloodlines, of an orphan who refused to let circumstances define her, of love that grew from duty into something profound and real. On quiet evenings, when Grace was asleep and the house settled into peaceful silence, Jessie and Charlie would sit together by the fire. Sometimes they talked about the school's expansion, or Grace's latest adventure, or the small victories they witnessed daily. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, knowing they had built something that would outlast them both. Not just in the school, or in their daughter, but in the fundamental shift they represented. Proof that worth was not inherited but demonstrated, that love was not arranged but chosen, that the most unexpected circumstances could lead to the most extraordinary outcomes. And when Jessie looked back on that terrifying morning when she had been dragged from a charity house and forced into a duchess's gown, she felt no bitterness. Because that moment, as painful as it had been, was the beginning of everything that mattered. The unexpected had not been the scandal everyone feared. The unexpected had been love, deep and true. The unexpected had been finding home in the last place she imagined looking. The unexpected had been discovering that sometimes the most wrong beginnings lead to the most right endings, and that unexpected grace had changed not just two lives, but the shape of the world around them, one kindness, one lesson, one open door at a time. Jessie's story proves that our beginnings do not determine our endings. She was forced to marry a duke, but she chose to love him, and that choice transformed everything. Sometimes the most wrong beginnings lead to the most right endings. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like to help others discover it. Subscribe for more tales of unexpected love and courage, and tell me in the comments where in the world are you listening from today. Thank you for spending this time with Jessie and Charlie. Until next time, remember you are worthy of love exactly as you are.